What are the influences on culture? I think the predominant influence is leadership. It really is. Leadership influences culture and the norms within the culture, and it does it in very powerful ways. I like to call them the 3 R's of cultural leadership. The first one is role modeling. The second one is reinforcement. And then the third one is reputation. So let me describe these a little bit further for you. Role modeling. What leaders do day in and day out through their own behaviors, they role model what's acceptable, unacceptable in the culture. If we see culture as being behavioral norms of what's acceptable, unacceptable, the role modeling of the leader really grants permission. And whether they know it or not, leaders are doing this just about all the time. All eyes are on the leader, how they make decisions, how they deal with conflict, how they go about recognizing and rewarding, how they go about listening to the people in their environments, are all ways that leaders role model. And the cues are taken. The cues are taken quite simply. If a leader states an expectation that everybody's going to be at the meeting that's starting at 9 o'clock, punctually at 9 o'clock, and then shows up at 5 minutes after 9, through that role modeling, they're actually granting permission. And so when we start to think about accountability and how commitments are kept within a culture, within an organization, a lot of it has to do with how the role modeling of the leader influences that. So what's acceptable, unacceptable when it comes to accountability directly cascades and flows from leadership at the top and through leaders in the organization, as it scales. The second one is reinforcement. And I found reinforcement to be so interesting because there's really 2 types of reinforcement that occur, active and passive. Now, active reinforcement is when I actually speak to something that you've done. Someone in the culture, someone in the organization does something, and what I do is I reinforce it. And I do that actively by recognizing it, by perhaps giving praise to it, by giving a pat on the back to it. That's an active reinforcement, and of course that will reinforce a repetition of that behavior and establish it as a pattern, eventually as a pattern and norm of what success looks like. I also actively reinforce by putting a stop to behaviors that shouldn't be in the culture, those that are considered to be unacceptable, whatever they are. So I become very active in recognizing, I become very active in stopping and confronting behaviors that don't belong in the culture. Well, that's the active role I take. The other one is the passive. One of the things I've discovered in effect is that the passive is more powerful than the active, because the passive is always there. We're constantly doing it as leaders. And so the passive would be if there is something occurring in the culture that is unacceptable and the leader doesn't step into it, doesn't confront it, doesn't do anything about it, well, we shouldn't be surprised that we're actually creating a norm, passively creating a norm. This is key. I refer to this as culture silence, and that's a term that I coined from the idea of social silence. See, sociologists use that term to define when a pattern of behavior emerges in a society that is actually destructive and is not of benefit, dysfunctional. Racism is a good example. And the behavior takes hold because no one confronts it or does anything about it. Culture silence really is in effect the same. Leaders see something happening and they turn from it. They don't confront it. They don't do anything about it. And so they passively reinforce behaviors. So we shouldn't be surprised as leaders if we get some dysfunctional behavior that's negative, and because we've not done anything about it, we shouldn't be surprised that it's been an established norm. And then the third one is reputation. And reputation is really an outcome, if you think about the first 2. In other words, role modeling and reinforcement become reputation. And I don't think there's any more powerful example of that that we've seen in the last several decades in business than that of Steve Jobs at Apple. As Steve Jobs became so much the reputation of the culture of Apple that the reputation of the brand relied and directly is aligned to his leadership. So the reputation of how a leader behaves finds its way through the culture and actually has an effect on the market value and the capability of the brand to compete in the marketplace. And I think it's very, very important to be able to recognize that. Leaders have a tremendous, tremendous influence on the patterns of behavior that we call culture, those norms. And again, it's a matter of how the leader role models, how the leader reinforces, and of course their behavior and how it aligns to the reputation of the culture, the organization, the brand value in the marketplace.